Welcome, everyone. I need you to imagine something for a second. Imagine loving everything about your wife, her smile, her laugh, the way she says your name when she is half asleep. Imagine trusting her completely. Now imagine this, one ordinary evening. You're sitting in the passenger seat. She's texting, and suddenly, she tilts her phone away. Her face changes, a notification pops up. And in that small, silent moment, your perfect marriage doesn't feel so perfect anymore. Because sometimes, it's not the big betrayals that break us. It's the tiny moments that plant doubt. And tonight, I'm going to tell you what happened next. If you want more real, raw stories about love, trust, and the moments that change everything, make sure you subscribe and stay with us. Because this story, it's just the beginning. I used to say it without hesitation. I love everything about my wife. Not just the obvious things. Not just the way she looks when she has dressed up for dinner or how she laughs when something genuinely surprises her. I mean, everything. The way she forgets where she left her keys but somehow always remembers the smallest details about my day. The way she hums softly when she's cleaning the kitchen. The way she falls asleep mid-sentence sometimes. Her words drifting into silence while her hand still rests on mine. Loving her was never loud. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was steady, familiar. Safe. The kind of love that doesn't need to prove itself because it shows up every day. Our marriage felt like that too. Steady. We weren't the couple posting perfect pictures online or making grand declarations in public. We were the couple who knew each other's coffee orders without asking. The couple who could sit in silence without it feeling awkward. The kind of love that felt built, not borrowed. She had this warmth about her. When she smiled at me, it felt like I had chosen right. Like every decision that led me to her was worth it. I admired the way she handled stress. The way she could calm me down without even trying. Even her flaws felt human and beautiful to me. Her stubbornness when she believed she was right. Her tendency to overthink. I loved those things because they were hers. That's why I didn't want to notice the changes. They weren't dramatic. Nothing obvious. No sudden fights. No cold shoulders. No slammed doors. If anything, everything looked the same from the outside. We still had dinner together. We still talked about work. We still said I love you before bed. But there were pauses. Small ones. Moments where her smile arrived a second too late. Times when she seemed present, but not fully there. I would tell her something, and she would respond. But her eyes looked like they were still somewhere else. At first, I blamed stress. Work had been demanding for her lately. I told myself she was just tired. Everyone drifts a little when life gets heavy. That's normal. Still, I started noticing how often her phone was in her hand. It wasn't obsessive. It wasn't obvious. But it was there, always within reach. When it buzzed, she'd glance down quickly. Sometimes she'd smile faintly. Sometimes her expression would flatten in a way I couldn't quite read. I told myself not to overthink it. Trust isn't loud either. Trust is quiet. It's choosing not to question every detail. It's believing that the person you love is exactly who you think they are. And I trusted her. Completely. But there's something about loving someone deeply that also makes you sensitive to even the slightest shift in their energy. When you know someone's rhythms, you notice when they change tempo. She started going to bed a little later than usual. Said she wasn't sleepy. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see the faint glow of her screen reflected against the wall. When I asked who she was talking to, she answered icily. A friend, a coworker, a group chat. Her tone was normal. Compsla. Too normal, maybe. But then again, what was I expecting? Suspicion? Nervousness? Was I looking for something that wasn't there? That's the thing about doubt. It doesn't storm in, it whispers. It plants a seed and lets your imagination water it. And I hated that seed. Because loving everything about her meant believing in her goodness. It meant believing that whatever changes I sensed were temporary, explainable, harmless. I didn't want to be the insecure husband, I didn't even want to project fears onto a woman who had given me no real reason to question her. Still, there were moments when she would laugh softly at something on her phone and instinctively tilt it slightly away. Not dramatically, just subtly, a natural movement, almost unconscious. And in those moments, I felt something I hadn't felt in our marriage before. Distance. Not physical distance. She still sat beside me, still leaned her head on my shoulder while we watched TV, still reached for my hand in the car. But emotional distance is quieter than physical space. It has the feeling that there's a door you used to walk through freely that now feels gently closed. I started replaying things in my head. Conversations, expressions, that half-second delay before she answered certain questions. The way her attention sometimes seemed split between me and something unseen. And every time I caught myself thinking too much, I would look at her and remind myself, I love everything about this woman. I loved her loyalty, her kindness, the way she defended me when someone criticized me unfairly, the way she once drove across town late at night just because I said I had a rough day. That's not someone who would hurt me, I told myself. But love has a strange vulnerability to it. The more you cherish someone, the more fragile your certainty becomes. Because losing them, or even imagining losing them, feels unbearable. So I held on to the version of us that felt solid. I focused on our routines, our inside jokes, the comfort of our shared life. And yet, somewhere beneath all that love, something quiet had shifted. Not enough to accuse, not enough to confront, just enough to feel. It was an ordinary evening, the kind you don't remember because it doesn't ask to be remembered. We had decided to drive out and pick up a few things before heading home. Nothing special, no tension, no argument lingering in the air, just another small, shared moment in the rhythm of our life. She slid into the driver's seat, adjusting it slightly the way she always did, even though it never seemed to need adjusting. I got into the passenger side, fastening my seatbelt as she started the engine. The radio came on automatically, low music filling the space between us. Streetlights flickered on as the sky shifted from soft orange to deep blue. She looked beautiful in that quiet, effortless way she always did, one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting near the gear shift. Calm, familiar, mine. A few minutes into the drive, her phone buzzed. She glanced down at it instinctively, not dramatically, not suspiciously, just the way anyone does when they hear that small, sharp notification sound. The screen lit up, casting a faint glow across her face. She hesitated for half a second, then picked it up. "I'll just reply quickly," she said, her tone casual, almost automatic. I nodded. Of course, it was normal. We both checked our phones. There was nothing unusual about that. She unlocked it with her thumb. Her eyes shifted between the road and the screen. Her fingers moved quickly, typing. I wasn't trying to look, but when you're sitting that close to someone, it's hard not to notice small details. The way her lips pressed together slightly, the way her brows lowered in concentration. Then she smiled. It wasn't a big smile, not laughter, just a faint curve at the corner of her mouth. Subtle, private. Something about it felt unfamiliar. I told myself I was imagining things. People smile at texts all the time. Friends send jokes. Co-workers send memes. It didn't mean anything. Another buzz. She looked again. This time, her expression shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. The smile faded. Her jaw tightened briefly before she typed another reply. Faster this time. The car felt smaller somehow. The music on the radio suddenly seemed louder, even though the volume hadn't changed. The hum of the engine felt more noticeable. I found myself staring out the windshield, pretending to be absorbed in the passing traffic. She adjusted the phone slightly in her hand, not in a way that screamed secrecy, not in a way that would look obvious from the outside, but she angled it just enough, so the screen faced more toward her body and away from me. It was subtle. So subtle that if anyone asked, I couldn't have described it as anything intentional. It could have been habit, comfort, glare from the streetlights. But I noticed, when you love someone deeply, you become fluent in their smallest movements. You learn the language of their gestures. And that slight tilt, That protective angle didn't feel like part of our usual language. I swallowed the thought before it could grow. "Don't do this," I told myself. "Don't create a problem where there isn't one." She typed again, paused, then locked the phone. The screen went dark. For a moment she seemed almost too focused on the road, both hands gripping the steering wheel now. Her shoulders were just a little stiffer than before. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Yeah," she said quickly. "Just work stuff? Work stuff? Simple? Reasonable? Logical?" I nodded again and looked ahead, but the air had shifted. It's strange how quickly a moment can stretch. What was probably only 30 seconds felt longer, thicker. Like time had slowed just enough for doubt to slip in unnoticed. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't pick it up immediately. She let it sit there in the cup holder, screen lighting up and then dimming. Her eyes flickered toward it once, twice, then back to the road. The silence between us grew heavier, even though neither of us had said anything unusual. Finally, at a red light, she reached for it again. Her face was unreadable now. Neutral. Controlled. I tried not to look, but my eyes betrayed me for just a second. I caught a glimpse of a name at the top of the screen. Unfamiliar. Not one of her close friends. Not family. Just a name I didn't recognize. That shouldn't have meant anything. People know other people. Co-workers, acquaintances, clients. Still, my chest tightened. She typed a short reply, locked the phone, set it down, face down this time. Face down. That was new. She had never cared before. Her phone was usually just there, open, unhidden. Now it felt like an object in the car with us, a third presence. The light turned green, and we moved forward. I watched her profile as she drove, the soft curve of her cheek, the familiar line of her jaw. She looked the same. She was the same woman I loved, the same woman I trusted, and yet something about that moment lingered. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't proof. It wasn't even an accusation. It was a feeling, a subtle shift in gravity. I wanted to reach over and take her hand like I always did at stoplights. I wanted to brush off the strange weight in my chest and laugh at myself for being dramatic. But instead, I sat still. The rest of the drive passed in small, ordinary conversation. We talked about what we needed to buy, about dinner, about weekend plans. Her voice sounded normal, relaxed again. If anyone had looked at us from another car, they would have seen a perfectly normal couple on a perfectly normal evening. And maybe that's what made it harder, because nothing obvious had happened. No confession, no confrontation, just a small tilt of a phone. A faint, private smile, and a silence that didn't feel as innocent as it used to. The sound itself was small, just a soft notification chime cutting through the quiet of the car, a sound I had heard 1,000 times before, without ever thinking twice about it. But this time it felt sharper, like it landed somewhere deeper than it should have. Her phone lit up again. I wasn't trying to look. I really wasn't. But when you're sitting inches away from someone, when the glow of their screen reflects faintly in the windshield at night, it's impossible not to notice. My eyes shifted for half a second, just long enough to see a name I didn't recognize. Not a heart emoji. Not something obviously intimate, just a name. Simple. Plain. And yet unfamiliar. She saw it too. Of course she did. Her fingers tightened slightly around the steering wheel before she reached for the phone. That tiny pause, that hesitation, felt louder than the notification itself. She picked it up. This time, she didn't smile. She read the message, her eyes moving quickly across the screen, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she glanced at me, just briefly, and looked back down. That glance did something to me. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't fear. It was just awareness, like she suddenly remembered I was there. She typed a response. Short, quick, efficient. Then another message came in almost immediately. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she replied again. The silence inside the car grew thick. The radio was still playing, some familiar song in the background, but it sounded distant now, like it was coming from another room. I became hyper-aware of everything. The hum of the tires on the road, the faint ticking sound of the turn signal, even my own breathing. I told myself not to be ridiculous. It's just... But the mind doesn't always listen to reason. It listens to feeling. And the feeling was strange. She shifted in her seat slightly and angled the phone closer to her body. Not dramatically. Not like someone hiding something obvious. Just enough that the screen was no longer casually visible from where I sat. That's when the atmosphere changed completely. It wasn't just about the message anymore. It wasn't about the name I didn't recognize. It was about the sudden awareness that something, however small, was being kept private, in a way it hadn't been before. Privacy isn't betrayal. I know that. Everyone is allowed their own space, their own conversations, their own world. But marriage blurs those lines. After years together, after sharing passwords and stories and vulnerabilities, you get used to openness. You get used to not feeling like an outsider in your partner's life. In that moment, I felt like an outsider. She locked the phone and placed it face down in the cup holder. Face down. I stared at it for a second longer than I should have. Why? Face down. It's such a tiny detail. So small, it almost feels embarrassing to admit that it mattered. But it did. Because she never used to do that. Her phone would sit screen up on the kitchen counter, on the couch, between us, on the bedside table. Casual. Unconcerned. Now, it felt deliberate. The car felt quieter than it had minutes before. I cleared my throat softly. "Who's that?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Curious, not accusing. She answered quickly. Too quickly. Just someone from work. Someone... not a name. Just someone. My mind latched onto that word. "Oh," I said, nodding as if that explained everything. She didn't elaborate, didn't offer more detail, didn't volunteer a story about what they were talking about, and maybe she didn't need to. Maybe I was the one expecting too much. But there used to be a natural flow. If I asked about a message, she would tell me, "Oh, it's Sarah complaining about her boss again," or "It's Mark asking about that project." There was context. Casual transparency. Now there was just someone. The space between us felt different. Not physically. We were still shoulder to shoulder in that small car, but emotionally, it felt like we were sitting a little farther apart. I tried to push the thought away. Don't turn this into something it's not. But doubt is quiet and persistent. It doesn't shout accusations. It whispers possibilities. What if there's more? What if that smile earlier meant something? What if I'm the only one who doesn't know? I hated those thoughts. They felt disloyal. She had given me years of love, of partnership, of solid life, and here I was, shaken by a notification and a turned phone. Still, the atmosphere didn't recover. We both tried to return to normal conversation. She commented on traffic. I responded. She mentioned needing to pick up milk. Primera. I agreed. The words were there, but they floated on the surface. Beneath them was something unspoken. The silence, after each sentence, stretched a little longer than usual. At one point, her phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't even look at it. She kept her eyes firmly on the road. It almost felt worse, because ignoring it suggested restraint. Restraint suggested intention. I found myself staring out the window, watching the blur of streetlights pass by. My reflection stared back faintly in the glass. Thoughtful, uncertain. It's amazing how quickly certainty can shift. 10 minutes earlier, we were just a married couple running errands. Now, I felt like I was sitting beside a question mark, and the hardest part was that nothing concrete had happened. No evidence. No confession. Just a notification, a name I didn't know, and a silence that felt heavier than it should have. If you've ever felt that tiny shift, that moment where everything changes without anything really happening, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. I didn't plan to ask her. I told myself I wouldn't. I told myself it was small, that I was reading too much into something ordinary. But the question kept circling in my mind, pressing against the inside of my chest, refusing to settle. It wasn't anger driving me. It wasn't even suspicion in its full form. It was discomfort, the kind that sits quietly but won't let you relax. We were still in the car, still moving through traffic, like nothing had changed. The city lights passed in streaks across the windshield. She looked calm again, almost as if the moment from earlier had dissolved, but I could still feel it lingering between us, thin and invisible. I turned slightly toward her. "Who were you texting?" I asked, keeping my tone light, almost casual. I even forced a small smile, as if the question didn't carry any weight at all. She answered immediately, "Just someone from work." The speed of her reply caught me off guard. It wasn't the answer itself. That part was reasonable. It was the lack of pause. No searching for words. No slight delay, just immediate clarity. Two. No. Lost more. Oh, I said again, pretending that was enough. But the silence that followed stretched longer than either of us expected. I waited, half unconsciously, for her to add more. A name, a complaint, a joke. Something to make it feel ordinary. She didn't. Instead, she adjusted her grip on the steering wheel and kept her eyes fixed on the road. I swallowed. My heart beat suddenly louder in my ears. "Everything okay at work?" I asked. "Yeah," she said quickly. "Just stuff. Just stuff." There it was again, that vague space where specifics used to live. I nodded slowly. "What kind of stuff?" That's when she locked her phone completely and slid it farther into the cup holder, almost out of sight. "Nothing important," she said. "You're overthinking." The words weren't harsh. Her tone wasn't defensive, but there was something firm about it. A subtle wall. "You're overthinking." Maybe I was. But the phrase didn't calm me. It did the opposite, because it shifted the focus from the situation to me, to my reaction. It made me question my instincts instead of the moment. I leaned back in my seat, staring ahead. "I was just asking," I said quietly. "I know," she replied, softer now. "It's really nothing." Nothing. Such a small word for something that suddenly felt heavy. The air inside the car felt different now. Not tense, exactly. Just aware. Like both of us knew the conversation hadn't fully resolved, but neither of us wanted to push it further. I replayed her responses in my head. The quick answer, the vague details, the way she moved the phone out of view. None of it proved anything. None of it crossed a clear line, and yet, something had shifted. It wasn't about the text anymore. It wasn't about the unknown name or the notification sound. It was about the space between question and answer, about the way transparency had been replaced with minimal explanation. I wanted to ask again. I wanted to say, "Why does this feel different?" But how do you explain a feeling without sounding irrational? How do you confront something that technically hasn't happened? She reached over and briefly touched my hand, a small reassuring gesture. "Hey," she said softly. "Don't make that face." "What face?" I asked. "That thinking face." I tried to smile. "I'm not thinking." She gave a short laugh. "You always think too much." Maybe she was right. But love sharpens perception. When you've spent years beside someone, you notice the smallest variations in tone, posture, breathing. I knew the rhythm of her honesty. I knew how she sounded when she was open and when she was holding something back. And tonight, there was a slight difference. Not enough to accuse, not enough to demand answers. Just enough to unsettle. The rest of the drive passed with surface-level conversation. She talked about dinner plans. I responded automatically. We both pretended the earlier exchange had been harmless. But inside me, something had cracked. Trust doesn't usually break in loud, dramatic ways. It doesn't shatter like glass. It fractures quietly, forming hairline cracks that you only see when the light hits at a certain angle. This felt like that. A small crack. And the hardest part wasn't what she said. It was what she didn't say. It was the absence of detail, the lack of casual openness that used to come so naturally. I stared at her profile again as she drove. She looked composed, normal, beautiful, even in the dim glow of streetlights. The same woman I loved, and yet I felt like I was sitting beside someone slightly farther away than before. When we finally pulled into the parking lot, she turned off the engine and unbuckled her seatbelt. She looked at me and smiled, as if everything was perfectly fine. Primera? Smiled back, because I didn't have proof. I didn't have certainty. I only had a feeling, and feelings are dangerous when you don't know whether to trust them or bury them. Have you ever had that tiny, nagging feeling in the pit of your stomach? The one you try to ignore, push down, tell yourself it's just you being paranoid? That's where I've been living for the past few weeks. It started subtly, almost unnoticeably. A text message quickly hidden when I walked into the room. A late-night call explained away as a wrong number. A sudden change in his phone password, justified as a new security feature. At first, I brushed it off. We all deserve privacy, right? I am not the kind of person who needs to know every single detail of my partner's life. We've been together for 3 years, and trust has always been the foundation of our relationship, or so I thought. But these little things started to pile up, like tiny pebbles forming a mountain of doubt in my mind. He started working late more often. "Big project at work," he'd say, looking tired. I wanted to believe him. I really did. I'd make him dinner, keep it warm, and wait. But then, a colleague of his mentioned how things at the office were actually quieter than usual. She said it casually, at a friend's party, with no idea of the storm she was kicking up inside me. I just smiled and nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there, next to him, watching the ceiling and replaying every strange moment, every flimsy excuse. My mind became a detective's office, and I was the lead investigator in a case I desperately didn't want to solve. I started noticing more, the way he'd jump if his phone buzzed. The vague answers to simple questions like, "How was your day?" It was always just fine or busy. The man who used to tell me every funny, annoying, or mundane detail of his workday was suddenly a closed book. The suspicion feels like a poison. It seeps into everything. When he smiles at me, a voice in my head whispers, "Is that genuine?" When he says he loves me, another voice asks, "Does he say that to someone else too?" I started to hate this version of myself, the suspicious, insecure person I was becoming. I'd scroll through his social media, looking for clues, for a name I didn't recognize, for a comment that seemed a little too familiar. It was exhausting, and I found nothing, which somehow made it worse. Was I just going crazy? Was I inventing all of this? I tried to bring it up once, gently. I asked if everything was okay, if he was happy. He just looked at me, a little confused, and said, "Of course, why wouldn't I be?" And he hugged me. For a moment, in his arms, the doubts melted away. I felt silly, childish even. But as soon as he pulled away, that cold feeling crept back in. The performance felt too smooth, the reassurance too quick. It was like he had a pre-written script for this exact conversation. The worst part is the loneliness. I can't talk to my friends about it. because saying the words out loud would make them real. Admitting my fears would be like admitting my relationship is failing, and I'm not ready for that. So I carry this weight alone, smiling through dinners, laughing at his jokes, all while a silent scream is trapped in my throat. I feel like I'm living a double life. There's the me that everyone sees, the happy, stable girlfriend, and then there's the real me, the one who lies awake at 3 a.m. heart racing, staring at his phone on the nightstand and fighting the urge to pick it up. I remember when we first met. The connection was instant. We could talk for hours about anything and everything. He made me feel seen, understood, safe. Where did that person go? Or was he never really there? Was it all just an illusion I wanted to believe in? This doubt is eroding not just my trust in him, but my trust in my own judgment. How could I have been so wrong about someone? Last night, he came home with flowers, just because, he said with a smile. My first reaction wasn't happiness, it was suspicion. A wave of it, so strong, it almost knocked me over. Was this a guilt gift? Was he trying to distract me from something? I hated myself for thinking it. I took the flowers, thanked him, and arranged them in a vase. My hands shaking slightly. They're beautiful. They're sitting on the kitchen counter right now, vibrant and alive. A stark contrast to how I feel inside. I know I can't go on like this. The constant anxiety is draining the life out of me. It's affecting my work, my friendships, my very sense of self. I have two choices, really. I can continue to live in this fog of suspicion, letting it consume me until there's nothing left. Or I can confront it. I can demand the truth, whatever that may be. It's terrifying. The truth might shatter my world. It might mean losing the person I thought I was going to spend my life with. It might mean facing the fact that the last 3 years have been built on a lie. But the alternative, this limbo of not knowing, is a special kind of torment. It's a slow burn, a gradual decay of the soul. Maybe the sharp, clean pain of the truth is better than the dull, constant ache of uncertainty. Maybe knowing, even if it's the worst-case scenario, will set me free. Because right now, I'm in a prison of my own making, and the only key is the truth. I'm looking at his sleeping face right now. He looks so peaceful, so innocent, and a part of me, the part that still loves him desperately, screams at me to just let it go. To choose blissful ignorance, to go back to the way things were, even if it's a fantasy. But I can't. The cracks are too deep. I've seen behind the curtain, and I can't unsee it. Tomorrow, I'll lay all my cards on the table. My fear, my suspicion, my heartbreak, and I'll have to be ready for his response. I need to prepare myself for the end of my world as I know it. But I also need to hold on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, there's a reasonable explanation for everything. Maybe my mountain of doubt is just a molehill of misunderstanding. Or maybe it's exactly what I fear it is. Either way, this has to end. I need to find my way back to the person I was before the doubt took over. I need to be able to trust my own mind again. Tomorrow, I'm taking the first step. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've ever felt this way, know you're not alone. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. See you next time.